Hey, and welcome to Eat Out at Home, the podcast. This is the place for those with exquisite taste who are on a mission to cook better, eat healthier, dine together, and add some gourmet to their everyday. I'm your host, Chef Evelyn, and on this podcast, we talk about all things food, cooking, baking, and entertaining as I share stories from my well-seasoned career as a professional chef for over 20 years. So if that sounds tempting to your taste buds, grab a snack, sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Hey, and welcome back to the podcast. So today, I want to talk about meal prepping and why I don't do it. And listen, if you are someone who meal preps and you have found that has worked for you, listen, I am not knocking that at all. I feel like we all have to find our own nourishing system that works for us that we can do consistently. I will tell you, as someone who enjoys food and who enjoys the process of cooking, that traditional meal prepping doesn't work for me. And let me clarify, when I'm talking about meal prepping, I'm talking about taking a day of maybe a couple of hours, or depending on, how long it takes you to cook, where you're preparing all of your meals for a given time frame. So some people will take like a Sunday afternoon and they'll cook all their meals for the week, right? They'll have their breakfast done, their lunch done, their dinner, whatever it is that they require or have planned out that they're going to eat. And I would tell you, that doesn't work for me. I like variety. And while I'm not anti-leftovers, there is a limit to how long and how much of something I will consume. Part of that is because I am a person who is single and child free. And so it's just me. And so eating something for 3 days is not a thing for me, or 4 days is not a thing for me. I also really like the freshness of food. So cooking something that I'm going to eat 6 days from now doesn't appeal to me personally, right? Now, I know for some people, meal prepping has been a lifesaver. It has really helped them in their eating out at home journey, or if they're on a health journey or something like that. So I'm not knocking it at all. I'm just talking about what works and doesn't work for me. And so if you're in the same category where you're like, listen, meal prepping is time consuming, it doesn't work for me, I've tried it, other people are doing it successfully, and for whatever reason, it's not working for me. Or if you're doing it and it's working, but you don't like it, which is like equally as important, and you're like, there's got to be another way. Today, I want to talk about another way, right? So this is not bashing meal prepping. Those of you who have found that useful and helpful, this is for those of us who we just cannot. Okay, we cannot, and we need something different. So I want to introduce you to the concept of ingredient prepping. Now, obviously, that is not a new concept, but in a previous episode, I talked about how meal planning, if you will, is misleading because it doesn't take into account all the steps that need to happen to get, food on the table. It doesn't take into account when you actually need to sit down and plan out the meals, when you actually need to, do a quick little inventory of your kitchen and fridge and pantry to see what you have. It doesn't account for when you actually need to get the groceries, whether you're going to the grocery store, whether you're doing grocery delivery or grocery pickup. It doesn't account for when you kind of need to prep those ingredients, aka mise en place is what we call it in the professional chef world. It doesn't account for all of that. All it accounts for is you saying, this is what I'm going to eat on this day at that time, right? So if you haven't checked that episode out, make sure you do. It's all about I think it's called the problem or the challenge with meal planning. So I don't meal prep either. And I do something called ingredient prep. Now, in another episode, which I'm not sure which one of these are going to go up first, I talk about the fact that I meal plan off of templates. And so because I use templates, and you can listen to that episode, because I use templates, it makes my ingredient prep so much easier. So let me give you an example. I know that oftentimes for breakfast, one of my meal templates, or my main meal template for breakfast, is I like a fruit, a vegetable, and a protein. I know that about myself, and typically some kind of tea, chai tea, or chai, matcha, ginger. There's usually some kind of tea going on, and that's just that. So anyway, Sometimes the format of getting that fruit, vegetable, and protein comes in the form of a smoothie. Sometimes it comes in the form of a breakfast sandwich with fruit on the side. Sometimes it comes in the form of an omelet or a frittata, with fruit or something. Like, it varies. I think you would really enjoy that episode. But because I know that, right, I talked about how it makes, it really minimizes decision fatigue. It makes shopping a whole lot easier. When we now move into the space of quote unquote meal prepping, or I'm going to say ingredient prepping, I know that, okay, I've got frozen fruit in the freezer. I know that I'm probably going to be buying a container of spinach to throw in those smoothies if I want to do that. And then I've got some whole fruit. Now, I'm not necessarily cutting up whole fruit at the beginning of the week just because I have pretty decent knife skills and it takes me like a nanosecond to cut up fruit. But what I may do is go ahead and make my smoothie packs, right? Because my smoothies are a little involved. Like, for example, my typical smoothie is blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, cherries, hemp seeds, chia seeds, flax seeds, a little bit of beetroot powder and protein powder, spinach, and probably a date, right? And then obviously my alternative milk of choice. I will typically prep that in a freezer bag and have that on hand and maybe do 2 weeks worth, so that in those moments where it's like, you know what, I don't have time to make a strata, if you will, for breakfast, I can grab that and the ingredients are prepped. I still have to make the smoothie, right? The ingredients are prepped, but I don't have to sit there and open up the 6 different bags of frozen fruit. I don't have to, okay, is the spinach washed and clean and ready to go? Okay, let me pull out all of my nuts and seeds. Let me pull out all my powders. It's already there, even though the smoothie is not made. And maybe that's not the best example, but let's transition this to, sometimes I like, boiled eggs, cut fruit, a bagel, and maybe some kind of breakfast sausage. So, and there's going to be some kind of vegetable there for breakfast. In that instance, I may boil up the eggs for 4 or 5 days. I already have the bagels there, and whatever vegetables I have, if I have sliced cucumbers, or if I'm going to do a salad, or if I'm going to do, charred broccoli or something like that, that may be ready to go, or the broccoli may be washed, cleaned, and chopped so that I can just flash it in the pan. My eggs are already boiled and peeled, right? I haven't created the whole meal, but I've created components. Like, I may have not cooked the broccoli because, broccoli cooked after 3 days. Like, I'm not eating that. Are you eating that? I'm not doing that. But if the broccoli is already washed and cut up, and all I have to do is saute it or throw it in the oven, that eliminates time because I prep the ingredients, even if I didn't prep the meal. I mentioned in my, meal template podcast about how I love like a bowl style lunch, right? Like, I like some kind of grains, some kind of protein, lots of leafy greens, and, different, veggie toppings. I may prep that, right? I may prep, okay, here I want to go ahead and chop up, the veggies that I want to have on there. I may, want to go ahead and have whatever protein ready to go. And I may go ahead, whatever kind of dip or whatever I want, that's already ready to go. Now, am I actually sitting there and assembling those in containers and putting those in the refrigerators? I'm not. And I know I probably could take that one extra step, but I don't want to, because some days I'm going to want a little bit more of this and a little less of that. Some days I'm only going to want certain parts of that bowl. Some days that may not be what I want, and I may want to eat it in a different format, even though the ingredients are the same, right? And so for me, I have found that ingredient prepping has been super helpful and less time consuming, but still aiding me in the goal of eating out at home without making it be, extremely laborious, right? So if I had to prep all of those ingredients and then cook all those ingredients, well, that is when, you start getting into these really lengthy cooking sessions that people get really discouraged by, because they're like, I just can't stand it. I don't like to do all the prep. And it's like, well, if you do the prep separately, I can get the meal done in 10 to 15 minutes. Now, granted, let me be clear. I am a professional chef, right? So, I move around the kitchen a little different than the average person. I don't have, small children, things like that. But the goal here when I share things that I do is not to say you should do this or this is a better way. It's maybe there's a nugget there that might be useful in the way that you get the meal on the table, right? Like, I'll give an example, and this is specifically for my single folks out there. I love a good salad. And the thing about my salad is I like a lot of different components, right? I like a lot of color, a lot of variety. I like a lot of components. And here's the thing. It can be challenging to create a salad, one, where you don't spend 14,000 hours chopping up the vegetables, okay, and washing and prepping. Two, it can be challenging if you are a single person or a small family to buy, whole things. Let's just say you like carrots on your salad. Well, I'm not going to buy a bag of carrots, right? Who's going to eat all those carrots? And it can feel expensive. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll buy the salad base, right? Like I'll buy the green salad mix, but then I may go to like Whole Foods salad bar. And if there's, if I want some artichoke hearts, and if I want some chickpeas, and I want, this kind of cheese, and I want this and that, instead of buying all those things individually, I'm going to buy it off the salad bar, but I'm going to buy my greens in bulk. I may do my own protein, and I'm off to the races. And then I can assemble as the week goes on, right? So, my goal with this podcast is really to share and discuss things that help us in our journey for eating out at home, entertaining, if you're on a healthy journey, which we'll get to that, because I really believe, and I'm kind of digressing here, that eating at home is like the first step to whatever healthy nourishing plan you are considering or that you are currently on. I have found it almost impossible to try to have a healthy eating plan without cooking at home. Let me know if you have found another way. I mean, maybe you could do meal kit delivery. And if that is the case, you're probably not listening to this podcast, right? But yeah, I just wanted to introduce you to the concept of ingredient prepping, having things ready versus having to cook the whole meal. And then that way, when you have your designated cook days, which we talked about in another episode, things are ready to go. And so it can take you less than, 20, 30 minutes to get, a meal on the table versus having to wash everything, chop everything, then actually cook, right? So with that being said, I feel like this episode has gone on long enough. Listen, make sure you are following me on Instagram at Chef Evelyn. I would love to hear your tips. Do you meal prep completely? Are you an ingredient prepper? Do you think ingredient prepping would be useful to you? And also think about some ways that, if you have it in your budget, that you can use your grocery store. Sometimes it's like, what, maybe this week I do need to buy some pre-chopped onion. Maybe I don't want to do it all the time, but it would, I'm using the grocery store as my sous chef, if you will. So let me know. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode. If you're enjoying this podcast, make sure to head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave it a review. And if you're curious about what I'm cooking in between episodes, make sure to stay connected with me on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, where I'm sharing delicious behind the scenes grocery hauls, recipe inspiration, food for thought, and so much more. I'll see you in the next episode.